The galaxy was old. It had seen the rise and fall of countless empires. Stars had been born and died. Civilizations had grown powerful and then turned to dust. But through all of this, one rule had remained the same for over 12,000 years. Every species knew it. Every leader taught it to their children. Every admiral whispered it to their crews before they jumped. Into unknown space, never provoke Earth. The Galactic Council was the largest governing body in known space. It had 800 member civilizations, each one with their own worlds, their own fleets, and their own ambitions. They argued about trade routes and territory. They formed alliances and broke them. They went to war over resources and pride. But no matter how fierce their conflicts became, they all agreed on one thing. The small blue planet called Earth was not to be touched. Commander Jake Harris stood on the observation deck of his ship, the Endurance. He was a man in his late 40s, with gray hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. He had served in the United Earth Defense Fleet for 25 years. He had seen battles and peace. He had watched friends die and enemies surrender. But right now, he was simply watching his home planet rotate slowly below him. Earth looked so peaceful from up here. He could see the blue of the oceans and the green and brown of the continents. Clouds swirled across the surface like cotton stretched thin. 8 billion people lived down there, going about their daily lives. Most of them had no idea what was happening in the stars above their heads. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss. Lieutenant Amy Cole walked in with a tablet in her hands. She was young, barely 30, with short brown hair and sharp eyes. She was one of the best communications officers in the fleet, and Jake trusted her completely. "Sir, we have another report," she said. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. The Valorian Empire crossed into the Kepler buffer zone again. 3 of their warships. They stayed for 6 hours before pulling back. Jake turned away from the window. "That is the 4th time this month." "Yes, sir." "And their ambassador made another speech yesterday. He called humanity a weak and primitive species, said we are not worthy of the systems we control." Jake said nothing for a moment. He had heard these words before, but not for a very long time. Most species in the galaxy had learned to respect Earth. They had learned the hard way, but the Valorians were different. They were new to the galactic stage. Their civilization had discovered faster-than-light travel only 300 years ago. In that time, they had conquered dozens of worlds and built a powerful empire. They were tall, reptilian creatures with scales that changed color based on their emotions. They were proud, aggressive, and completely convinced of their own superiority. Most importantly, they had never seen what humanity could do when provoked. On the neutral station called Axis Prime, Ambassador Diana Grant sat in a large circular room. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was calm and pleasant, but her eyes missed nothing. She had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had negotiated with some of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Today she was facing the Valorian High Delegate. His name was Dexkerval, and he was enormous. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with dark green scales and yellow eyes that glowed in the artificial light. His voice was deep and filled with contempt when he spoke. "Your species occupies systems that belong to superior civilizations," Dexkerval said. "The Orion territories should be ours. You will give them to us, or you will face the consequences." Diana smiled. It was a small, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "High Delegate, I appreciate your directness. I must advise you to reconsider your position." Dexkerval laughed. It was an ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. "Reconsider? Why would I do that? Your species is weak, your bodies are fragile, your lifespans are short, are nothing compared to the glory of the Valorian Empire." Diana looked around the room. There were representatives from a dozen other species present. They were watching the exchange with nervous expressions. Some of them looked away when Diana's eyes found them. Others shook their heads slightly, as if warning her not to say what they knew she was about to say. She turned back to Dexkerval. "Before you make any decisions, I suggest you speak with our neighbors. Ask the Thesan Collective about us. Ask the Corvani Federation. Ask anyone who has been part of this council for more than a few centuries. Why would I waste my time with such things?" Because, Diana said, her voice dropping lower, you might want to ask them about the Kreth Dominion. The room went completely silent. Even the environmental system seemed to quiet down. Several of the alien delegates stood up and left without a word. Others stared at the floor as if they wished they could disappear. Dexcrevel tilted his massive head. The Kreth. I've never heard of them. No, Diana said softly. You would not have. That is rather the point. She stood up and gathered her things. The Kreth Dominion once controlled 2,000 star systems. They had a fleet of 50,000 warships. They were one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. She paused at the door and looked back at the Valorian. Now their name is used to frighten children. Think about that, High Delegate. Think very carefully. She left the room. Behind her, Dexcrevel sat in confused silence, wondering what she had meant. He would soon find out. The whole galaxy would soon remember, and by then, it would be far too late. The archive world of Thiessen 4 was a quiet place. It was covered in massive buildings filled with records from across the galaxy. Every treaty, every war, every first contact had been recorded here for thousands of years. Scholars from hundreds of species came here to study the past. One of those scholars was a young Valorian named Kethraval. He was different from most of his people. He was curious rather than aggressive. He asked questions when others simply followed orders. His superiors found him annoying, but they could not deny his intelligence. Kethraval had noticed something strange. Every time the subject of Earth came up in council meetings, the older species reacted with fear. They changed the subject quickly. They looked away. Some of them even left the room. His superiors told him it was nothing, just old superstitions. But Kethraval wanted to know the truth. He spent weeks searching through the ancient records. Most of them had been locked away or marked as restricted, but he was persistent, and eventually he found what he was looking for: the first contact. Between humanity and the galaxy had happened about 5,000 years ago. A Thiessen exploration vessel had discovered Earth and made peaceful contact. The humans were primitive by galactic standards. They had not yet developed faster-than-light travel, were still fighting wars among themselves over resources and beliefs. The galactic community had watched with interest as humanity slowly grew. They invented new technologies. They settled their differences. They unified their planet under a single government. And eventually, they built their first starships and joined the galactic community. At first, the other species had not been impressed. Humans were small and fragile. They could not survive in extreme environments without special equipment. Their lifespans were short compared to many other races. Most importantly, they were emotional creatures. They felt things deeply. They formed strong attachments to their families and friends. Many species considered this a weakness. The Kreth Dominion had certainly thought so. Kethraval found the records of what had happened 400 years ago. The Kreth had been a powerful empire back then. They controlled thousands of systems. Their fleet was massive. Their technology was advanced. They had looked at humanity's young colony ships traveling through space and seen an opportunity. 3 colony ships carrying about 40,000 humans had been traveling to a new world to start a settlement. The Kreth had intercepted them. They had captured all 3 ships and taken the humans as slaves. They'd expected the small species from the small blue planet to accept this and move on. They had been terribly wrong. On another ship far from Thiessen 4, Captain Ben Torres was telling this same story to his crew. The Vigilant was a destroyer-class vessel, fast and heavily armed. Ben was its commander, a man in his early 40s with dark hair and a serious face. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Claire Martinez, listened carefully as he spoke. When word reached Earth about what the Kreth had done, everything changed, Ben said. The people of Earth had been divided before, different nations, different interests, different goals. But when they heard that 40,000 of their people had been taken, that families had been torn apart, that children had been stolen, they unified in a way the galaxy had never seen. Claire nodded slowly. I read about it in the academy. Every resource on the planet was put toward one goal. That is right, Ben said. Scientists stopped working on their own projects and joined the effort. Factories that had been making consumer goods started producing weapons. People volunteered by the millions. In 6 months, Earth had built the largest war fleet in its history. He pulled up an image on the screen. It showed a vast armada of ships stretching across the darkness of space. 1,200 vessels, ranging from small fighters to massive battleships. The Liberation Fleet, they had called it. The Kreth had no idea what was coming. They thought we would negotiate. They thought we would accept payments or trade agreements in exchange for our people. They sent diplomats to discuss terms. Ben paused. We sent them back in pieces. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard stories, of course. Every human child grew up learning about the Kreth War, but hearing it told like this, in such simple terms, made it feel more real. The Liberation Fleet reached the Kreth border in 3 months, Ben continued. The Kreth sent their fleet to stop us. It was a battle that lasted for 3 days. When it was over, the Kreth had lost over 10,000 ships. We had lost 800. How is that possible? Claire asked. They had better technology, more experience in space warfare. Ben smiled, but it was not a happy expression, because they had never fought anyone like us. They fought for territory and resources. We fought for our families. We did not care about strategy or acceptable losses. Every pilot was ready to die if it meant saving even one of those colonists. The Kreth could not understand that kind of dedication. They could not match it. The Liberation Fleet had not stopped at the border. They had pushed deep into Kreth space, destroying everything in their path. Military installations were wiped out. Industrial centers were reduced to rubble. And finally, the fleet had reached the Kreth homeworld. We gave them one chance to surrender, Ben said quietly. They refused. They still believed they could win. So we made an example that the galaxy would never forget. The Kreth homeworld had been rendered uninhabitable. Not destroyed completely, but poisoned. The atmosphere had been filled with chemicals that made it impossible for any Kreth to survive there. Billions of them had fled to other worlds, but their empire was broken. Within a decade, the Kreth dominion had collapsed completely. Now they were scattered across the galaxy, a broken people with no home. Back on Thesan 4, young Kithravel finished reading the records. His scales had turned pale gray, the color of fear among his people. He understood now why everyone was so afraid of Earth. He understood the unspoken rule, and he knew that his empire was about to break it. He tried to send warnings. He wrote reports and sent them to his superiors. He begged the council to reconsider their plans, but no one listened to him. The Valorian Empire was too proud. They believed they were stronger than the Kreth had been. They believed that 400 years had made humanity soft and weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Valorian War Council met in a massive chamber on their homeworld. The room was designed to impress and intimidate. The ceiling was so high that it disappeared into shadows. The walls were covered with the banners of conquered species. And at the center of it all sat High Admiral Vexkerval, his scales glowing bright red with pride. "My fellow Valorians," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber, "I bring you glorious news. Our forces have successfully captured the human colony on Kepler 44b. 50,000 prisoners now belong to the Empire." The chamber erupted in celebration. Valorians roared their approval. Fists pounded on tables. It was the sound of a species that believed it had just won a great victory. Vexkerval raised his hand for silence. The humans thought they were safe. They thought their reputation would protect them. They were wrong. Now Earth will have no choice but to bow to our demands. They will give us the Orion territories. They will pay tribute to our empire. And they will learn that the Valorians are the true masters of this galaxy. The celebration continued long into the night. No one noticed the few council members who left quietly, their faces pale with fear. No one saw the coded messages being sent to other species, warning them to prepare for what was coming. The Valorians were too busy celebrating to see the storm forming on the horizon. On Earth, the news arrived at 3:47 in the morning. Greenwich Mean Time. President Laura Hayes was woken from a deep sleep by her chief of staff. She read the report in silence. Her face showed no emotion, but her hands were shaking slightly. 50,000 people. Men, women, children, farmers and teachers and doctors. Ordinary people who had traveled to the stars to build a new life. Now they were prisoners of an empire that saw them as nothing more than bargaining chips. The report included casualty numbers from the initial attack. 300 dead. Among them were children. The youngest was 4 years old. President Hayes got dressed and walked to the Situation Room. Her advisors were already there, waiting for her. They had all read the same report. They all knew what was coming. General Matt Cooper was the first to speak. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a man who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Madam President, the Valorian Empire controls approximately 140 star systems. Their military consists of roughly 8,000 capital ships. They believe they are negotiating from a position of strength. They are wrong, said Admiral Kevin Price. He commanded the Deep Space Fleet, the largest military force in human history. Our reserves alone outnumber their entire military. We have ships they have never seen, weapons they cannot imagine. We have spent 400 years preparing for this day. President Hayes nodded slowly. She turned to Dr. Eric Novak, her chief science advisor. He was a quiet man with thick glasses and nervous hands. What about the contingency weapons? She asked. Eric hesitated. Madam President, we have never deployed them. The Galactic Council specifically asked us to keep them sealed. They were terrified when they learned what we had developed. The Galactic Council, Laura said, her voice flat. Just watched 50,000 of our citizens get kidnapped by a hostile power. They did nothing to stop it. They did nothing to warn us. Their opinion no longer concerns me. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she was about to say. Everyone knew there was no going back. Activate Protocol Omega, she ordered. Full military mobilization. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have. I want us ready to move within 48 hours. General Cooper nodded. In our message to the Valorians, President Hayes looked at the image on the screen. It showed the captured colony, smoke still rising from the buildings. It showed Valorian soldiers dragging humans away in chains. It showed a 4-year-old child crying for her mother. Send them one message, she said quietly. Return our people within 72 hours, or their empire will cease to exist. No negotiations. No extensions. 72 hours. The message was sent immediately. It was short and simple, just 2 sentences. It offered no room for discussion or compromise. It was not a diplomatic communication. It was a countdown to destruction. Vexkerval received the message in his private chambers. He read it 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. Then he laughed. It was a long, deep laugh that shook his entire body. He broadcast the message across the Valorian Empire. He showed it on every screen, in every city, on every world. He called it proof of humanity's arrogance and desperation. He told his people that the humans were bluffing, that they would never dare attack the mighty Valorian Empire. His admirals assured him that their defenses were strong. Their fleet was ready. The humans would lose thousands of ships if they tried to attack. Victory was certain. The hours began to tick by. On Earth, ships launched from orbital stations. Soldiers said goodbye to their families. Weapons that had been sealed for centuries were brought online. In the captured colony, the prisoners watched the sky and waited. They had faith in their people. They knew that Earth would come for them. The only question was, how many Valorians would die before it was over? On Thesan 4, Scholar Cathravel watched the news with tears running down his scales. He had tried to warn them. He had begged them to listen. But pride had blinded his people to the danger. 72 hours passed. The prisoners were not returned. The Valorians had called humanity's bluff, but humanity had not been bluffing. On the 73rd hour, the first human ships entered Valorian space. Behind them came a fleet so large that it blocked out the stars. And aboard those ships, millions of humans prepared to do what their ancestors had done 400 years ago. They were going to rescue their people, and anyone who got in their way would pay the price. The Valorian border outposts were spread across 40 star systems. Each one was equipped with powerful sensors that could detect ships entering their space from light years away. Each one was staffed by trained officers who monitored the darkness 24 hours a day. For centuries, these outposts had kept the Empire safe. On the 73rd hour, after Earth's ultimatum, every single outpost went silent. All of them. At exactly the same moment, Admiral Vexkerval received the report in his war room. For the first time, his scales showed a hint of blue, the color of uncertainty. "What do you mean they all went silent?" he demanded. "We have lost contact with all 40 border stations," his communications officer reported. His voice was shaking. "We sent scout ships to investigate. They did not come back." Before Vexkerval could respond, a new alert filled the room. It was a proximity warning. Something was coming. Something massive. Commander Jake Harris stood on the bridge of the Endurance as his ship dropped out of hyperspace. Through the main viewport, he could see the stars of the Valorian border, could also see his fleet spreading out around him. 900 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything the Valorians had ever faced. And this was just the first wave. "All ships report ready, Commander," Lieutenant Amy Cole announced from her station. Her voice was calm and professional, but Jake could see her hands trembling slightly. No one had ever deployed the weapons they were carrying. No one knew exactly what would happen when they were used. Jake looked at the tactical display. The Valorian defense fleet was mobilizing ahead of them. 8,000 ships, just as the intelligence reports had predicted. They were forming a defensive line, preparing to meet the human attack. "Open a channel to all ships," Jake ordered. "This is Commander Harris. We all know why we are here. 50,000 of our brothers and sisters are being held prisoner. 300 more are dead, including children. The Valorians were given a chance to make this right. They chose to laugh at us instead." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Today they learn the truth. Today they learn what happens when you take our people. All ships, weapons free. No mercy." The battle began. The Valorians expected a conventional fight. They expected an exchange of energy weapons and missiles. They expected losses on both sides, followed by negotiations or retreat. That was how space battles worked. That was how wars were fought in the galaxy. The human fleet did not fight like that. The first volley of weapons was unlike anything the Valorians had seen. They were not simple energy beams or explosive warheads. They were devices that attacked matter at the molecular level. Ships did not explode. They simply came apart as if they had been made of sand and a strong wind had blown through them. Lieutenant Amy Cole watched her sensor display with growing horror, not at what was happening to the Valorians, but at the scale of it. In the first 3 minutes of the battle, over 2,000 enemy ships had been destroyed. The human fleet had lost 12. "Commander," she said quietly, "they are trying to surrender. Multiple ships are broadcasting surrender signals." Jake's face did not change. They had 72 hours to surrender. "That offer has expired. Relayed to all ships. Continue the advance." The Valorian defense fleet lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, there were no survivors. The ships that tried to flee were hunted down. The crews that tried to surrender were ignored. Known. The message was clear and brutal. Humanity had come for their people, and nothing would stand in their way. Across the galaxy, other species watched the battle through long-range sensors and spy satellites. They had known this day would come eventually. They had hoped it would not happen in their lifetimes. Now they gathered in council chambers and private rooms, watching the destruction unfold. On Thesan 4, the young scholar Kethravel watched with tears streaming down his face. His people had been warned. He himself had begged the council to return the prisoners, but no one had listened. Pride and arrogance had blinded them to the truth. Now they were paying the price. The human fleet did not stop at the border. They pushed deep into Valorian space, destroying everything in their path. Military stations were reduced to rubble. Shipyards were dismantled. Communication networks were silenced. Within a week, the Valorians had lost 67 star systems. Within 2 weeks, that number had risen to 90. On Earth, President Laura Hayes received hourly updates on the campaign. She read each report carefully, noting the number of enemy casualties and the progress toward the captured colony. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. There was no joy in what was being done, but there was no regret either. President General Cooper said during one briefing, "The Galactic Council is requesting a meeting. I want to discuss a ceasefire." "What did you tell them?" she asked. "I told them that we would consider their request after we have recovered our citizens, not before." Laura nodded. "Good. What is the status of the rescue operation?" "Our ground forces are approaching the colony now. Initial reports suggest that the prisoners are being held in a central detention facility. Our special operations teams will extract them within the next 6 hours." 6 hours. That was how long it would take to save the people who had started all of this. 6 hours and 50,000 lives would be returned to their families, but the Valorian Empire would never be the same. By the time the operation was complete, they had lost 100 star systems. Their fleet was gone. Their infrastructure was in ruins, and humanity still had ships in reserve. The message had been delivered. The galaxy had received it loud and clear. Never provoke Earth. 1 month had passed since the first shot was fired. The war was over, though calling it a war seemed almost generous. Wars implied 2 sides capable of fighting. Oh, this had been something else. This had been a lesson. Ambassador Diana Grant returned to Axis Prime,
The neutral station,
where she had first warned Vexkerval about the consequences of his actions. The station was different now. The hallways that had once been filled with diplomats and traitors were nearly empty. Species that had gathered here for centuries now stayed away, afraid to draw attention to themselves. Diana found a quiet corner in the observation lounge. Large windows looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the direction she was facing, was the space that had once belonged to the Valorian Empire. 140 star systems. Billions of lives, all of it silent now. She ordered a drink and sat alone with her thoughts. She had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had prevented wars and ended conflicts. She had always believed that words were more powerful than weapons. But some lessons could only be taught with fire. An elderly figure approached her table. He was a Thesan, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. His body was covered in soft gray fur, and his many eyes blinked slowly as he sat down across from her. Diana recognized him as High Counselor Vethanol, one of the founding members of the Galactic Council. "Ambassador Grant," he said softly, "may I join you?" She gestured to the empty chair. "Please." Vethanol settled into a seat with the careful movements of an ancient being. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species evolve and go extinct. He had lived through more history than most civilizations could remember. "Your people have made your point," he said finally. "The Valorian Empire is gone. 140 star systems, silent. Billions of lives, erased. Even their homeworld," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Diana nodded slowly. "They took our children, I know." Vethanol's many eyes glistened with something that might have been tears. "We have always known what your species is capable of. That is why we kept the peace. That is why we counseled patience and respect. We thought everyone understood the rule." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But this was beyond what even we imagined. The Kreth were defeated. The Valorians were annihilated. There is nothing left. Not even ruins to remember them by. Your weapons did not just destroy their civilization. They erased it." Diana looked out at the stars. She thought about the rescued colonists, now safely back on Earth. She thought about the 300 who had died in the initial attack. She thought about the 4-year-old girl who had been photographed crying for her mother. "Let me tell you something about humanity," she said quietly. "We are not conquerors. We do not want your worlds or your resources. We came to the stars to explore, to learn, to grow alongside other species. We spent centuries building bridges. We formed alliances. We contributed to galactic society. We followed your rules and respected your traditions." She turned to face Vethanol directly. "But there is one thing we will never tolerate. One line that must never be crossed. Threaten our families. Harm our children. And we will burn everything you have ever built until nothing remains but ash and memory. Her voice hardened. The Valorians knew the rule. Every species knows the rule. They chose to break it anyway. They thought our kindness was weakness. They thought our patience was fear. They learned the truth too late. Vethanol was silent for a long moment. His eyes moved across Diana's face, as if searching for something. "And now?" he asked finally. "What happens now?" The galaxy is terrified. Species that have been peaceful for millennia are building weapons. Everyone is afraid that they will be next. Diana shook her head. "They have nothing to fear from us. We are not interested in conquest or domination. We never have been. As long as the rule is followed, humanity will remain what it has always been: a friend, an ally, a partner in exploring the universe." She finished her drink and stood up. "But let this be a reminder to everyone. We have weapons that can erase civilizations. We have the will to use them. And if anyone ever threatens our people again, we will not hesitate." She paused at the door. "Hopefully, no one ever forgets again." Back on Earth, the celebrations were quiet. There were no parades or victory speeches. The rescued colonists were reunited with their families in private ceremonies. Memorials were built for those who had died. Life slowly returned to normal. President Laura Hayes addressed the nation one final time. She spoke about the sacrifices that had been made. She spoke about the importance of protecting those you love. She spoke about the hope for lasting peace. She did not apologize for what had been done. She did not express regret. Some things were worth any price. Commander Jake Harris returned to the observation deck of the Endurance. The ship was in orbit around Earth once again, its mission complete. He stood at the window and watched his homeworld rotate below. Just as he had done before all of this began, Lieutenant Amy Cole found him there. She stood beside him in comfortable silence for a while, watching the blue marble turn. "The Galactic Council is requesting formal talks," she said eventually. "They want to reaffirm the treaties, strengthen diplomatic ties, make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Jake smiled, but there was no joy in it. "They are scared. Should they be?" He considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "They should be grateful. Because as long as we are allies, they never have to fear what lies in the darkness. They never have to worry about being conquered or enslaved. They have the protection of the most dangerous species in the galaxy." He turned to face her. "And as long as they remember the rule, they never have to fear us either." Amy nodded slowly. "What about the Valorians? The survivors, I mean? There are still millions of them scattered across the galaxy. They will rebuild eventually. In a few thousand years, they might even become a spacefaring civilization again. And when they do, they will tell their children the story of what happened. They will teach them the rule. And hopefully, they will never forget." The stars continued their eternal dance outside the window. Somewhere out there, in the void, where the Valorian Empire had once ruled, there was only silence. No ships, no stations. No signs of the civilization that had existed just 1 month ago. It was a monument, a warning, a reminder of the one lesson that every species in the galaxy had now learned. Some species were not meant to be provoked. Some rules were not meant to be broken. And some prices were too high to ever be worth paying. The galaxy remembered. And in the silence where an empire had once stood, that memory would echo forever.